my parents did it, so that was kind of it, I was never a really bad person. I think I had a temper and things like that when I was younger. But I mean that stems from a lot of other things, But for me, like it seemed like Christianity was a like a blind faith kind of thing. Like there's few people did it because I didn't even know why. Like I was like, well, the morals are good and stuff like that, but is there really any proof that any of this stuff is real? So it didn't really make sense to me. And I loved science. I loved Stephen Hawking. I still love Stephen Hawking because he's a brilliant guy. So I grew up reading a lot of science. Stephen Hawking, Brian Greene, things like that. And if it can be tested, it can be observed. It didn't really make sense to me. Because I'm like, well, if it's real, see, even things like quantum physics, even it's all chaos and like that, but still can be observed to a point, And a lot of things like this, like my parents are really strong in their faith, but it is still kind of weird with me and my parents, we still kind of get along, but it's always hard because we don't communicate very well, I don't know where I'm going with this. Yeah, I got saved. Like it's a really long thing. Like it's a really long process, and I had a lot of experiences and a lot of things that helped me understand. The final thing was an understanding of in the end that God is love. In our commandments, like all the stuff in the Bible and everything that's been written for the Lord, it all boils down to love. And when Jesus said, everything you will believe and everything that you'll live for will be summed up in love your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself, and Paul later on goes on just to say that, everything is summed up in love your neighbor as yourself, and then everything started making sense to me, started making sense, when the Pharisees come up to Jesus and saying, should we, who do we pay taxes to? Do we pay taxes to Caesar? And he's like, he asks for a coin. He's like, whose image is on this coin? And it's funny the word he uses. He says image. In the beginning, God says, we were made in His image. Yeah, and so Jesus is like, whose image is on this coin? Like, well, Caesar's. He's like, give to Caesar what Caesar's, give God what's God's. So no matter what you do to anybody, you're doing it to God. Whether you're loving someone, you're loving God. If you're hating someone, you're hating God. And I think it was that realization that it is very universal. And once you understand that, everything else in the Bible starts to make sense. And I was ignorant, too, to believe that the things in the Bible aren't real because it's very historic. She's had her hand up for a long time.
Hold on one sec, because I just want to let her give a chance to do the same. I'll get back to her, but the thing that's really interesting, to surmise what you just said, I think it's the humility is really what you're talking about. I think maybe when you had the revelation of the humility of God, that maybe that was something that kind of flipped the switch for you. That's interesting.
Yeah, it was and my home life wasn't bad, but like I never had a real connection with my parents. Like from the time I was little, like I don't know, until like I started making friends at schools like that. I never really saw my parents, because they not that because they wanted to not see me, because they worked really hard. They worked 12-hour shifts every day. I owe them a lot for that, but I never really knew. I still don't know them very well, because they still work really hard. They drop us off at the babysitters at like 5:30 in the morning before school, and we were from babysitters. She would take us to school, pick us back, and I'd be there till 11 o'clock, and that was like until I was like in junior high. And by that time I met Jared, our other guitarist, and when that happened, I was just over there all the time.
Awesome. Go ahead. Just briefly tell us how the Lord captured you.
Well, Sierra was talking about his parents and how he kind of felt alienated a little bit, not really close or whatever. I think that comes into not knowing that God is a father and what that means, but not knowing that kind of relationship that's just supposed to be all right here with you all the time, protecting and correcting and providing all the time, you know, and that's kind of how I grew up. And I thought you're supposed to do, you know, fend for yourself, take care of yourself. The morality in my mind was, you know, if you do something wrong and get caught, what's wrong is that you weren't smart enough, not that you did something wrong. And so that was my morality all the time, and I didn't realize that what was wrong was that you did wrong. And if you got caught, it's because you did wrong. And I made my own morals, and I really hurt myself over and over and over and over. And if you live that way, then you're gonna, I mean, I just was real destructive. You know, I was into drugs and hanging out with the wrong people and bad relationships. And whenever I was fighting with my grandmother one day, I was ready to commit suicide. I had was planning to commit suicide, and my grandmother and I were fighting so bad that day, just because she could scream so loud. Like, my grandma has this like really high-pitched voice sometimes when she's angry, and just to get her to be quiet, I finally was like, okay, I'll go to church, just to get her to stop screaming, because she was saying, you have to go to church, you have to go, you can't just live this way. And so I went that night, and everything the preacher said, like, I sat in the back like this. I hated Christians. I was like, oh, these people are so happy, and they don't know anything about life. They're so stupid. I hate this. And I was so mad at being there. But when that guy started talking, this older man is crying, caught my attention, because I never seen an old man cry like that, saying, there's a suicidal spirit in the room. And he said, God wants you to know that he loves you, and this is not the end for you. He has something for your life. I'm 16 years old. You know, you guys, if you've heard of our band, you see that God did have something, you know. And so that day, you know, he said, please come up to the front so we can pray for you. And I was not going to go. That was embarrassing. Besides that, I had been the one standing up in class to all the Christian kids that were at that church saying, you believe in God? Oh, well, then why does this happen? And blah, blah, blah. I was such a jerk to them. That would have been, for me to do that in front of them, you know, would have been embarrassing. So I never went. But when I went to the door to go out of the church, the deacon grabbed me by the arm, and he had been crying, this old man. And he said, the Lord wants me to speak to you. And he says, even though you've never known an earthly father, that God will be a better father to you than any earthly father could ever be. And I've learned, and he laid his hands on me and prayed for me, and I felt God show up, and I believed, and changed my whole life.
Real quick, what's your question? Real quick.
Absolutely, I don't know anything about, like my fiance says this all the time, how do you know this? And I'm just like, God is my father. It says that God is a father to the fatherless, a mother to the motherless. He puts the lonely in families. He'll put people around you to encourage you. This is your, if you're a Christian, you have a huge family, you know? And he's your provider, he's your protector.
I think that's it. No more questions, brother. I think that, you know, universally, you know, why we're here is, you know, and to answer your question, just, you know, I mean, walking with the Lord is